from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Destruction and devastation in central Gaza. Dozens killed in Israeli airstrikes as the Palestinian presidency rejects Israel's plan for the future of the enclave. This as an Israeli delegation arrives in Paris for another round of ceasefire talks. An inferno rips through an apartment block in Spain, killing at least 4 people, with many more still missing. And the United States announces hundreds of fresh sanctions against Russia before the 2-year anniversary of the Ukraine conflict. At least 40 Palestinians have been killed and dozens of others wounded in what officials in central Gaza are calling a massacre. The strikes happened as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu presented his plan for the future of the enclave, which was immediately rejected by the Palestinian leadership. The urgency of diplomatic efforts is increasing before the Islamic holiday of Ramadan. An Israeli delegation has arrived in Paris for ceasefire talks. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. So, Sarah, what's the latest we've heard from Israel on these ceasefire and hostage negotiations?
Hello, Robin. You did mention they've touched down now in the French capital. That meeting is expected to kick off in the coming hours. And here in Israel, there is quiet optimism that something may be achieved this time around after the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pulled out of talks in Cairo last week. Now, this Israeli delegation is headed up by the head of the Mossad, that's David Barnea, also the Shin Bet chief, Ronan Bar. They'll be meeting and discussing all of this with the CIA director, Bill Burns, also the Egyptian spy chief, and the Qatari Prime Minister. A lot of hope here of some sort of a breakthrough. And this decision to send the Israelis was really made in the middle of the night last night after it was confirmed that around 45 of these hostages who are chronically ill had actually received that medicine that was sent to them about a month ago. Now, all of this as the US Mideast envoy Brett McGurk has been holding talks with senior Israeli officials here. We're talking Benjamin Netanyahu, also the Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, with these talks reportedly very constructive. Here's a little bit more of what we heard from the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking at the G20.
The conflict in Gaza between Israel and Hamas. We're focused intensely on trying to get an agreement that results in the release of the remaining hostages and that produces an extended humanitarian ceasefire. And again, those are goals that I think virtually everyone in the G20 shares.
And according, Robin, to an anonymous source very close to these talks, there are indications that Israel and Hamas are willing to move forward on an interim deal which may see the release of 35 or so Israeli hostages for an unknown number of Palestinian prisoners.
Meanwhile, Sarah, Israel launching a drone strike in the West Bank overnight. What happened?
This happened in the early hours of the morning, Robin. Very dramatic pictures that have been released by the Israeli military. The strike happened on a car. It was in the West Bank refugee camp of Jenin. We can confirm that one person has been killed, the military identifying him as Yasser Hanoun. They say he's a Palestinian Islamic Jihad operative and was on his way to carry out a terror attack. He has previously been jailed for terror-related activity in Israel. It's also being reported, according to Palestinian media, that a 17-year-old boy was also killed in this strike, with a number of other people wounded. And this is the second such incident in the West Bank, in Jenin, in a matter of days. These drone strikes, which are extremely rare, are becoming quite common now, especially since October 7. And as we've been seeing, Robin, daily raids in the West Bank since October 7. The Israeli military says that it is trying to root out terrorists, while people who live there say that it is some sort of a collective punishment against them.
Sarah, thank you very much. Our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. Well, that's the view from Israel. Let's head to Gaza now and talk to our correspondent in Rafah, Noor Harazin. So, Noor, how are Palestinians coping with what are now severe shortages of humanitarian aid?
Well, yes, the situation here in Gaza is actually deteriorating, especially with the very small number of humanitarian aid trucks that are being allowed to the Gaza Strip. Even now, we are talking about both borders open, like the Rafah border between Gaza and Egypt is open, the Kerem Abu Salim border between Gaza and Israel is open. Aid supposed to be allowed to the Gaza Strip from both borders and in a big number, especially that we are talking about thousands of aid trucks that are actually standing on the front gate of the Rafah border from the Egyptian side. However, very small number of humanitarian aid trucks is actually being allowed to the Gaza Strip. 2 trucks of cooking gas every day, 2 trucks of fuel every day, which is actually 5% of what the people and the population of Gaza needs. The people here are actually starving. They are struggling in this very bad living condition, especially with the recent statement by the UN that they could actually close their doors after many countries cut their funds on the UN. And we are talking about the UNRWA. I mean, it is the biggest and the first supporter of the Palestinian refugees here in Gaza. So yes, people are actually afraid. They are scared of the future, especially that we are talking about the month of Ramadan, which is a few weeks away from now.
And what have we heard from Hamas after these ceasefire talks in Cairo?
Well, Hamas's delegation headed by Ismail Haniyeh left Cairo this morning. According to statements from Hamas that were published on social media, they are optimistic, but again, they insisted that they want the condition of the Palestinians being able to go back to northern Gaza in mid-October, and shortly after the Israeli land invasion in Gaza. The Israeli military actually isolated northern Gaza from the rest of the Gaza Strip, and we are talking about more than 1.5 million people that were displaced from northern Gaza and also other parts of Gaza to Rafah. So Hamas has this very important condition, and this is what also the people here on the ground want. They want to go back to their homes in northern Gaza, even if it means that they will set tents on the rubble of their destroyed homes, but they still want to go back. So yes, people are optimistic, Hamas are optimistic, and maybe, yes, in the upcoming days, we would hear the news or the announcement of a new ceasefire, a new humanitarian truce here on the ground between Israel and Hamas.
Noor, thank you very much. Our correspondent Noor Harazin in Rafah. There are fears that the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees could soon be forced to shut down its operations in the Middle East due to a lack of funding. Major donors like the United States, Canada, Germany and the UK have suspended payments pending the results of a UN investigation into allegations that UNRWA staff took part in the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. Our correspondent Jodie Jacobs reports.
For millions of Palestinians in Gaza, the primary UN agency UNRWA is a lifeline. They depend on it for healthcare, social services, jobs and food. UNRWA staff were accused last month of participating in the October 7th attacks on Israel. This led to a full-blown United Nations investigation. At least 17 donor countries and the European Union cut their funding, which the agency says has worsened an already dire humanitarian situation. UNRWA warns that it will most likely be forced to shut down its operations in the Middle East at the end of the month if the funding does not resume. But the United Nations says there is no other agency in the world that can replace UNRWA.
Any attempt of replacement that is not possible, if it would be possible, would mean a huge multiplication of the resources needed for the humanitarian action.
One expert believes the funding cuts are collective punishment for Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip.
Let's be very clear as well. Israel has had a vendetta against UNRWA for a very long time, precisely because their presence, the life-saving support they provide to Palestinian refugees. This Israeli government wants to deny almost the existence of Palestinian refugees.
Oxfam, one of the aid agencies that works alongside UNRWA, estimates more than 2 million people are already facing hunger in the Palestinian territories.
Oxfam and other aid organizations have no capacity to consume the work and the role that UNRWA is currently doing. And it will be disastrous, let me just put it that way. UNRWA closing shop on the 1st of March is something that we can't even begin to imagine. I think this is a time when with everything that's happening in Gaza, this is the time when aid should be increased.
But Israel's ambassador to the United Nations says there's long-standing proof that Hamas has infiltrated UNRWA and the UN has done nothing about it.
We implored them for years to carry out a comprehensive search of all UNRWA facilities in Gaza. Yet not only did they refuse, they chose to bury their heads in the sand and ignore the reality.
A claim the United Nations has refuted. Countries like the US, Germany and the United Kingdom have publicly maintained that they will only reinstate funding once the investigation is complete. The UN Secretary General will only receive an interim report into that investigation in late March. Many say it might be too late and the agency will have to close down, leaving millions of people destitute and hungry. Jody Jacobs, CGTN, New York.
Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has arrived in Valencia, where at least 4 people are known to have died in a huge fire which tore through twin apartment blocks. Well, our correspondent Ken Brown is there. So, Ken, what's been happening?
Yes, Robin, 4 people confirmed dead and as many as 15 missing after a fire ripped through this apartment building here behind me in the Campanar neighborhood of Valencia City. 3 days of official mourning have been announced today. The fire is said to have started at around 5:30 p.m. yesterday evening, local time, in a 4th floor apartment. And reports are that within a half an hour, the entire building was engulfed in flames. Now, as you can see, there is still smoke coming out of the building. It's a 14-story building, 138 apartments. Some 16 firefighting units were called to the scene. They struggled to contain the fire. Now, the latest on the ground is that the firefighters have managed to enter the building, initially accessing the first few floors. They waited due to the heat of the building and concerns over the integrity, the structural integrity of the apartment block. So the firefighters spent most of the morning cooling down the building, making sure that it was safe to enter. The search for missing victims continues to be the top priority now. As I mentioned, some 15 people still unaccounted for. Some dramatic scenes were broadcast around the country, live around the world, as panicked people waited on their balconies. They were trapped, calling out for help. Firefighter ladders had to be brought into the scene some hours after the fire started. Now, 15 people have also been treated by emergency medical services, 7 of them firefighters. So clearly the emergency workers doing their best here. 4 victims that we do know have lost their lives have not been yet identified, and the authorities have said that they are mobilizing between 4 and 8 autopsy teams to help identify those victims. Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain, visited the scene earlier today and expressed his solidarity with the victims. Here's what he said.
The priority now, as has been conveyed by the other authorities, is to search for victims and undoubtedly to try to safeguard the safety of public servants. On behalf of the Spanish government, and I think from Spanish society as a whole, we would like to express our solidarity, love and empathy to the families of the victims of this terrible fire.
Sanchez also offered all the help and resources of the national government to Valencian officials. He said the immediate priority was to provide urgent support for the victims. Next is to clarify what happened and then to help the victims of this, the families of this terrible tragedy. We heard that many of the people displaced from this fire have been staying in homes, in hotels. Many people have opened their homes to them. We've also seen outpourings of solidarity, pick-up points around the city that are delivering food, things like clothes, things like nappies for babies. But of course, the immediate priority right now is to try and see are there any survivors and to account for the people still missing.
Ken, thank you very much. Our correspondent Ken Brown in Valencia. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Kyiv says at least 3 people have been killed in a Russian drone attack as the conflict in Ukraine nears its 3rd year.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Destruction and devastation in central Gaza. Dozens killed in Israeli airstrikes as the Palestinian presidency rejects Israel's plan for the future of the enclave. An Israeli delegation arrives in Paris for another round of ceasefire talks. And an inferno rips through an apartment block in Spain, killing at least 4 people, with many more still missing. The United States has announced hundreds of new sanctions targeting Russia over the war in Ukraine and the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. It comes as 3 people are reported to have been killed in a drone attack in the Ukrainian city of Odessa. Saturday marks the 2-year anniversary of the conflict, with analysts warning that Moscow is conducting a cohesive multi-axis offensive for the first time in over a year and a half in areas along Ukraine's eastern front line. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Megumi Lim, who's in Kyiv. So, Megumi, what can you tell us?
Well, let's first talk about the sanctions. As you said, U.S. President Joe Biden just announced 500 new sanctions. This is the largest single package of economic sanctions announced by the United States since the start of the full-scale war in Ukraine. Now, it's unclear which specific individuals or entities will come under these sanctions, but the target has been made clear. These sanctions will target individuals that are connected to Navalny's imprisonment. These sanctions will target Russia's military industry and also companies in third countries that have helped and supported Russia's war effort. The sanctions are also designed to reduce Russia's energy revenue in an aim to cripple Putin's war chest. Now, these sanctions, Washington say that will be rolled. They say they will be rolled out in partnership with other countries, and it's aimed to hold Russia accountable for the war in Ukraine and also the death of Navalny. Now, Biden has said that these sanctions will ensure that Putin will pay an even steeper price for his aggressions abroad and also repressions at home. But as you said, Ukraine and Russia is marking its second anniversary of the war tomorrow, and Kyiv is still desperate for more military aid from the United States. As we know, the funding bill has remained stuck in Congress, and Kyiv is still desperately in need for more ammunition as it enters its third year of war against Russia.
So what's been happening on the military front?
Well, on the military front, Russian forces have been trying to push forward, as you mentioned earlier, along different axes of the front lines, especially after its capture, Russian forces' capture of Avdiivka last week. This has been considered Moscow's biggest battlefield victory in months since the fall of Bakhmut in May of last year, 9 months ago. And Russian forces are feeling emboldened. They're trying to apply pressure all along the 1,000-kilometer-long front lines. Avdiivka was a very important defensive stronghold for the Ukrainian military over the past decade. It has helped protect other cities and villages along the front lines, but now the Ukrainian troops have had to retreat. And analysts say that this may have created an opening for Russian forces to push forward. And I've just been in the eastern regions of Ukraine, in the Kharkiv and Donetsk regions, and people there have said that they are afraid of further Russian advances, that they are afraid that they may come under Russian occupation again.
Megumi Lim in Kyiv, thank you very much. Well, let's go to Russia now and talk to our correspondent Dasha Chernysova in Moscow. So Dasha, what's been the reaction from Russia to these US sanctions?
Well, those sanctions have been expected in Moscow. Moscow has no illusions that the Western countries will continue to impose more and more sanctions, and therefore they are described in Russia as the futile attempts to curb the Russian development. We have heard also the Russian foreign minister commenting on the EU sanctions package, saying that this is the continuation of what is called in Moscow as anti-Russian fever. Moscow does say that those are illegitimate sanctions because they are introduced unilaterally, and they do not go in line with the United Nations or the international law. So Moscow is saying that in response to those European Union sanctions, Moscow is expanding its stop list of the officials and representatives of the European Union that could not actually travel to Russia. So we are yet to hear for the foreign minister's statement on the US sanctions, but we do know that they are targeting several entities, 26 entities in 11 countries, including in Serbia and the UAE. But Moscow does say that it will continue to develop its own technological sovereignty inside the country, and its military-industrial complex is independent on the Western technology. It can produce everything it needs domestically.
There has been a statement, though, from Vladimir Putin marking Army Day.
That's right. The Russian president has issued this statement to the Russians. He was praising the defenders of Russia. He was talking about the past defenders of Russia, and also has praised the work of the soldiers who are now fighting in Ukraine in what Moscow calls its special military operation. We also have heard the Russian president saying that there are many risks in the current world, in the world today, and therefore the potential of the Russian army that has to be very capable and very strong is the prerogative for the Russian Federation, because it is, according to President Putin, the only guarantee of Russia's independent development and its security. He also went on to say that Moscow continues its effort to modernize its military-industrial complex. Those comments come just a day after the Russian president has flown on a modernized Tu-160M nuclear-capable strategic bomber. And the Russian president also made a strong reference to the Russian so-called nuclear nuclear triad, saying that Moscow is continuing to modernize it, and the share of the modern weapons and equipment in the strategic nuclear forces has already increased to 95%, and the naval component of the nuclear triad has been upgraded to almost 100% with the most sophisticated and modernized weapons.
Dasha, thank you very much. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Britain and the EU have signed a post-Brexit agreement aimed at combating illegal migration. The deal between the UK government and the European Border and Coast Guard Agency will boost cooperation on prevention, information exchange, training and technology. It also gives the UK access to EU intelligence on criminal gangs involved in human trafficking. Hungary has signed a deal to buy 4 fighter jets from Sweden as Budapest looks to approve Stockholm's bid to join NATO after nearly 2 years of delays. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán said Parliament would vote on the ratification on Monday. He made the comments during a meeting with his Swedish counterpart Ulf Kristoffersson. Both leaders said they did not agree on everything, but will cooperate where possible.
Touchdown, it may take some time to actually confirm the status.
A private US firm has made history after it became the first commercial company to successfully land a spacecraft on the moon. The robot lander Odysseus, built by Texas-based Intuitive Machines, touched down near the lunar South Pole on Thursday. It's the first American spacecraft to land on the moon in more than 50 years. The headlines again. Destruction and devastation in central Gaza. Dozens killed in Israeli airstrikes as the Palestinian presidency rejects Israel's plan for the future of the enclave. This as an Israeli delegation arrives in Paris for another round of ceasefire talks. And an inferno rips through an apartment block in Spain, killing at least 4 people, with many more still missing. And that is The World Today. Thanks for watching. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hello and welcome to the weather forecast. I'm Tierney. Well, over to Europe. More clear skies are likely to develop across a vast majority of the continent over the next couple of days under the influence of the ridge of high-pressure system. And rain and snow will be mostly confined here to the southern portion of Europe on Sunday, and here by Monday, even more clear skies are likely to develop here for a vast majority of the Balkans. So please enjoy the clear skies as well as you can. And with that weather pattern, temperatures across a good portion of Europe will also take an upward trend in the next few days. And for instance, here for the majority of the Iberia Peninsula, high temperatures will be ranging between 15 to 20 degrees Celsius for both Sunday and Monday. However, the majority of Russia will remain rather cold. Most of the high temperatures will be about 5 to 10 degrees Celsius below freezing, and the temperatures difference between the west and the eastern portions of Europe will be as big as 30 degrees Celsius. So please dress up accordingly. And about business and travel, overcast conditions in Brussels with high 14 and low about 7 degrees Celsius on Monday, and Warsaw will see some partly sunny skies in the morning hours. But notice that the overnight low temperatures will be in the negative readings. So please pay special attention to the big temperatures difference between the highs and the lows, and do put on an extra layer during the morning and evening hours.